Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Run Up Live. We are very excited to have you. I am Grace Segers, a staff writer here at the New Republic. I am joined by my partner in crime, Daniel Strauss, as always, and we have a really exciting show for you today, interview. We're here with Annalyse Keller, who is a senior director at 7Letter, and before that worked on the Hill for a very long time and is an expert in all things politics, and I'm sure has lots of really fun things for us to talk about. So just going to take a look at our questions here. Annalyse, Daniel has told me that you are a debt ceiling geek. Those are his words. And he mentioned that because I am also a debt ceiling geek, again, Daniel's words. So I first of all just wanted to kind of get your take on the current debt ceiling crisis that we have, the disagreements, and how you think this will end up resolving itself.
Yeah, well, thank you first off for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I I don't know. I guess yes, I have been really following the debt limit. I think it's one of the big challenges facing Republicans. So kind of whether or not Republicans have interest in it, it's what is on the table this year, and it is the big thing that Republicans. It's a big test for Republicans, I think, and for this kind of fractured Republican conference that McCarthy has, right? He has really tight margins, and it's just going to be difficult with some of the more conservative Freedom Caucus members to get them across to raise the debt limit. I've heard you guys talk about this before. It's certainly not always the most exciting thing to talk about, but it's obviously super important, right? It's just the idea that we have to pay for the money that that's already gone out the door, right? So this I think Republicans talk about this a lot in the context of the budget, and it's certainly connected to the budget, and it's certainly connected to the appropriations process, definitely, but they're not the same. So I guess to go back to your question about how this gets resolved, and kind of the state of play. I mean, we had the CBO come out and say that July to September is kind of when these extraordinary measures that have been getting us thus far are going to expire, and we're going to have to vote to raise the debt limit. And I think it's going to be tricky. There have been a lot of different ideas on how this gets done. I think some of them are less likely. I think there's some conversations. I've talked about this before, maybe extraordinary measures that people have talked about, right? Like the Treasury has talked about just sort of not, just sort of paying the bills, right? Just not sort of adhering to the need for Congress, because there's conflicting law as far as whether or not Congress needs to raise the debt limit and whether or not Treasury can go ahead and pay the bills. So, I mean, there's talks about that. There's been some convincing arguments that that's a way forward. I personally think it has to be done legislatively. I think Republicans are going to have to raise the debt limit. I think, even moderates right now in the Republican conference are really hoping that some budget cuts can get done, and there could be some consensus around, maybe it's a caps deal. That's kind of what McCarthy has put forward. So, I mean, this is quite a moving target, and there's a lot to sort of unpack here, Grace. So I think it's difficult to know exactly how this is going to play out. But I think obviously the potential fallout of not doing this is, catastrophic. We were talking to one of my colleagues, and I were talking to Rohit Kumar, who was McConnell's deputy chief of staff during the 2011 negotiations, and he likened failure to pay, defaulting on our loans to a nuclear fallout. So, which is pretty dark stuff, obviously. So, it's difficult to say. I'm optimistic that it will get done, but I think it could cost McCarthy his speakership, and that's it's quite a statement. So I'm like happy to unpack that. But I think there's a lot of dynamics with the Republican conference right now that are not going to make it easy on McCarthy to get this thing done.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that, and with the struggles that McCarthy is going to have. I feel like, having written about the debt ceiling for a couple of years now, I feel like I'm constantly shouting into the void, like, this could be really bad. We need to make sure this doesn't happen. And it's not exactly like Congress is known for getting things done on time or ahead of schedule. So I feel like this is just going to be pushed until the last possible minute, as it often is. And with regard to McCarthy, we've seen him already have the struggle of keeping his conference together in the very first week, when he needed speaker votes, and he obviously got them, but it was a very arduous process. So now that we're looking ahead to this, which is very complex for any size Republican majority, how does McCarthy keep it together? And like you said, if he loses his speakership, why does that happen? And unpack that statement as you said you would.
Yeah. So I think, I think I think the caps deal is probably how this gets done, right? So there's going to be budgetary caps on the discretionary spending. I think that's something that McCarthy has put forward as, the path forward and what he's hoping to negotiate for. I mean, there's been some conversations around, quiet conversations. It's not been, I haven't seen it much in the press yet, but I don't know how likely it is. I've talked to some of my colleagues still in the in the Republican conference on the Hill about this potential option, which is this short-term clean debt limit to kind of marry up the budgetary process a little bit better, if perhaps July is the month that we're looking at for the debt limit expiring. So there's conversations around this clean debt limit to buy some more time, essentially, right? Like it would be, probably a 90-day buying more time, getting more of McCarthy's conference on board with some of these potential, cuts that a lot of his caucus, and as I mentioned, even the moderates are super interested in getting. I don't think that we're going to see moderate Republicans push very loudly and quickly and early to get this clean debt limit. I think they're going to want to see this process play out and see what McCarthy's able to bring to the table here. I think, the reason that I went to the speakership and the threat of McCarthy's speakership is because, Grace, as you mentioned, it was a very arduous process for McCarthy to secure the speakership. I think largely, while it might not have been something that Republicans were very excited to have play out, it certainly wasn't a shining moment. I do think we've kind of moved past that, and it has been kind of quieter. So I'll just say that, but I agree with you. It was a very arduous process, and I think that a lot of the concessions that were made by McCarthy will be very challenging for him to navigate, and in particular to the motion to vacate, which is another thing that is like people, it's very dull stuff. It's not exciting, but it's so important because this is the rule that McCarthy brought back, whereby basically one member of the Republican conference can bring up a vote to basically remove the Speaker of the House. So, if you follow that to the logical conclusion, we don't really know what Democrats would do when faced with a vote like that. But when you follow that to its natural conclusion, you're faced with, Freedom Caucus members who feel that McCarthy didn't fight hard enough for their demands and their desires. And as a retribution, they're using this tool, which they now have, to really move in a different direction if they're that displeased with the way that this process plays out.
Do you have a sense on how the HFC, but Republicans at large feel about McCarthy since he was elected chair or speaker?
I, you know, I do think that he has done a good job bringing them into the tent, so to speak. I mean, he's put some of those members on rules committee. He's given them pretty substantial roles on, some of the special committees. And I think when you keep some of those folks busy, I mean, I think that, having that responsibility can oftentimes be the best antidote to, the need to kind of go out, if you have a big job to do and you kind of get involved in the process and you kind of buy into the process. I think he's been smart to do that. So time will tell if that holds, but I think so far he's done a good job to bring those people in. And it's not been overnight, like, to be clear. I mean, he has done this, steadily over the course of his leadership.
If I could ask just one more debt ceiling question. I know
Nerd alert. Man,
as
you guys,
many as
your
you
eyes
want.
both light up at this. Here, okay, can I just interject on this? Like, here's the thing. It feels like there's sort of a numbing, I think, for a lot of even news junkies when you hear about the debt ceiling. Like, I feel like when it's a slow news cycle, Punchbowl will be like, and we're close to a debt limit showdown, or when they were at Playbook, the same thing. And it just, like, if you are not ensconced in this, I guess I want to know to you two, like, how do you not just think it'll, the hostage will be rescued like it has every other time until now? This is for both of you. First question I've asked Grace.
Well, I would just say, as a reporter, that's kind of the problem, is because we've never actually defaulted, which is good, because as I've written many times, it would be extremely, extremely bad. But you almost begin to feel like the boy who cried wolf here, where I'm shouting over and over again, this will be really, really bad. And then the bad thing eventually does not happen, even if we come very close and there are still lesser side effects. So then it's the question of, how do you impress upon people that this could be really, really bad without also causing a panic because it hasn't happened thus far? The only other thing I will say before getting off to our illustrious guest is that just because something bad hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't in the future.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you, Grace. I think it's tough. One thing I will say is I don't think that there are 218 Republicans that will vote to raise the debt limit, which I think is something that people need to keep in mind when, it is easy to have the conversation around, okay, we need to cut spending, we need to balance the budget, all of those things, make the Freedom Caucus happy. But there are a lot of those members that have not voted to raise the debt limit, have no intentions of voting to raise the debt limit. You're negotiating with no one. So, I mean, there's something to be said for, like, Democrats are you're gonna have to sell this to Democrats. And yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing to do to impress upon, the American public, this, pretty wonky thing, and kind of what it means if our credit rating changes, right? I mean, that's challenging, and you don't want to be alarmist. But I think after talking in particular to Rohit, like, he basically said to me that 24 hours before they
Oh yeah, I
were going
remember
to default.
Yeah, that was news, or sort of like yeah. So could you explain what he shared?
Yeah. So again, just as a reminder, he was McConnell's deputy chief and was, right in the center of these 2011 negotiations where we almost did default. That's the closest we've come to defaulting. So he said that we were 24 hours outside of the need to raise the debt limit. Otherwise we would default on our loans. And he said that he was 100% sure that we were going to default the next day. So, I mean, I think it's not, it's not comforting for people to like at home to realize that, even the people that are at the table, don't have this certainty that things are going to be resolved and that Congress is going to handle this.
Yeah.
So, sorry,
And,
Daniel,
and
we're just.
wait, the resolution of that story was that it was like Obama and McConnell were negotiating. They had reached an impasse. So it was kicked back to Biden and Cornyn, who was his counterpart?
Yeah, so I
It wasn't
think
Thune.
so it was Biden that was involved, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to recall as well. But yeah, I mean, the other thing, just going a little bit back to the McCarthy conversation with Biden, I mean, there was a lot more certainty in 2011 that, the conference was united, right? So
Mm-hmm.
these were, I'm coming to you and I'm saying, I'm McConnell, or, I'm saying I have the confidence and the votes of my conference when I'm negotiating with you. And at the time, Biden
Yeah.
was pretty involved in those particular negotiations. So I do think that's another challenge for McCarthy when he's having these negotiations with now President Biden to, not necessarily have the ability to say, my word and the negotiations that I'm presenting to you today are fully backed by my conference. Because I don't think there's I don't think that's the
Yeah.
case.
And I did want to bring up 2011 because, as you said, that was closest we have gotten to default. The Standard & Poor downgrade our credit for the first time. Interest rates went up and they stayed up for years. It just was all around not great. And it feels like a decade later, we are in a very similar position. And one of the things that came out of 2011, as some people might remember, was the agreement that led to the super committee, whereby a bunch of Republicans and Democrats essentially came together and had to come up with a plan for cutting the deficit. And then they did not come up with a plan. They had a huge impasse, and then we had sequestration. It was whole big mess. This is my very imprecise decade later recap of what happened. And now I think everyone, or at least I would hope everyone, could agree that $31 trillion in debt, not great. We should probably address that. But I just don't see how we've gotten to a place 12 years later where suddenly Republicans are going to be cool with increasing taxes and Democrats are going to be cool with spending cuts so that we could actually balance the budget. So I guess I'm asking you if you're more of an optimist and there's actually a chance we could figure out some kind of bipartisan agreement here. Are we doomed to constantly repeat that disagreement?
Yeah, I'm not an optimist when it comes to that. The only thing I'll say that to try and put sort of some, I agree. I think that so many, I mean, across the political spectrum, everyone is fully on board with, hey, like this is bad. We've got to do something about this, right? We need to come together. We need to have these conversations. I mean, using the debt limit, that's the leverage that Republicans have right now. And so they're going to try to get what they can out of it and extract what they can out of it. I do think I do think Republicans have been talking a little bit more openly. I mean, even since I would say even in the last couple of Congresses where, it was a really, really bad word to say that you wanted to talk about defense spending. I mean, you could not talk about it. And I do think, whether or not there are any like meaningful defense spending cuts, I think that we have reached a place where, some Republicans are saying, there are some things that we would have never put on the table before, but, we need to look at all of this and kind of figure out how we get to the bottom of this and, what is out there that we can cut. We love love the like waste, fraud, and abuse, and like, and you know, that's just like not going to cut it. It's not enough. So those are, yeah, I mean, look, it's tricky. I wish I was more optimistic that there was going to be some bipartisan consensus around, you know, some of these really big ticket items and how to go about cutting them.
All we debt ceiling nerds are not optimists. Got it. Annalyse, could you talk a little bit? This is what I'm nerdy and super excited about. Could you talk a little bit about how control came to be out of 7-letter? And I, you know, when we were talking, when I was pitching you and coming on, I think I articulated what's interesting about this to me more or better than I can now. I just find it fascinating that you guys sort of built this franchise out of a consulting firm, and what the firm, I mean, the firm benefits from the name recognition and sort of the added audience, because we know you and your co-host, and we want to hear your takes. I hate that phrase, but like, it's just sort of fascinating to me that you guys have this, and other firms are sort of experimenting with that, which I find interesting too. Yeah.
So for those of you, I guess, not familiar, my co-host Brendan Buck and I, who are both at 7-letter, you know, PR consulting firm in DC. Honestly, we were the two of us were just kind of chatting. We're both, you know, former Republican Hill staffers, and we were talking about the midterm elections and feeling like things were going to kind of change around here. This was back when we were much more, speaking of being optimistic, we were much more optimistic about Republicans' opportunity to pick up the House pretty handedly. I think we even thought, you know, maybe there was some opportunity for Republicans to make some ground, maybe flip the Senate. We knew that like a divided government was coming, and we felt that there was kind of this gap in Republican communicators that were talking about the Republican conference. You know, obviously we're transparent that we're Republicans, but our goal wasn't to create a podcast where we had a bunch of hot takes and a bunch of sort of spin. We just wanted to explain the way that Republicans were thinking about different things, and in a pretty straightforward way. Obviously some of it's, you know, a little wonky and complicated, but you know, our audience is mostly here in DC. So we thought that was kind of missing. And we also, you know, wanted to bring on some guests to explain what Republicans in Congress were going to tackle. And one of those big things is the debt limit. We talk a bit about the investigations that Republicans have undergone. And then sort of unknown to us at the time, you know, we did some conversations around what went wrong for Republicans. We did a little, you know, analysis of the midterm elections and how things, you know, how we got it wrong and how other people got it wrong, and what we thought, you know, the Republican Party needed to be thinking about going forward. You know, but we also didn't anticipate McCarthy's really intense speaker race. And Brendan's background is specifically Boehner and Ryan, and he even worked for McCarthy. So it was like his Super Bowl, you know, going through all of the different things that could happen. And so yeah, that's kind of how it was our brainchild. We have been really fortunate that 7-letter has really just allowed us to kind of have full creative license with this and do whatever we want, which is, I'm sure, you know, not a benefit that everyone would be afforded. So we're really grateful for that. I have seen some other firms kind of do similar things. And yeah, you know, I hope that if there's a market for it, that people, you know, are more interested in doing this. It's, you know, it's been great, and we've really enjoyed it. We're gonna, you know, I think get back out there with the debt limit whenever it comes, and do a lot more. So if you love all things debt limit, like Grace and I, that's where you can follow along.
Yeah, I have listened to an episode or two, and I really like how you guys are pretty candid. And I mean, obviously you are a PR consulting firm, but I don't feel as if I am just listening to spin, but to people who know what they're talking about and want to communicate what's happening. So just as a listener, I appreciate that. So look forward to your future debt ceiling episodes.
Annalyse, related to this, one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, because it's my job, is just like, if you were to go back in time and talk to Annalyse when she was on the Hill or staffing Senator Gardner or someone else in general, and you told that Annalyse like what the media environment is like now, what would you say? And I ask that because in the last two elections, Twitter played such a prominent role in the course of that election. And it feels like right now there's a little bit of a lull in, or a what's next period. It's not like podcasts will persist. There are a lot of newsletters, but it feels a lot like newsletters will go the way of a lot of these subscription services where we'll just decide one day, I'm not paying $7 for X, Y, or Z, but keeping The Last of Us and HBO. But like, I guess I sort of wonder what that next sort of beacon, what that next thing will be. Will it be Morning Joe or not Morning Joe? Morning Joe was in the past. Will it be Playbook or something else?
Yeah. I mean, if I went back to myself when I first started, I'm trying to recall, because I don't think that when I started on the Hill, I was even managing a Twitter account. I mean, that is how, I don't know, or if my boss had a Twitter account, it was almost inactive. I mean, we were on Facebook, but that was, here's how you. It was very informational. It was not, we were not saying, tweets to sort of get on the Sunday shows. Like, there was just really none of that. So I guess going all the way back, yeah, it's changed drastically. I mean, Twitter, I think has changed my industry. I think it's changed your industry a lot. I think it is now a fast track for folks to, do a number of things with their careers, which has been beneficial for a lot of people. But yeah, it's been used and it's transformed in so many different ways across the last decade. And obviously when when Trump was elected, it really, I mean, it went to totally different places. And we would have, I'd be walking with Gardner, and we were in meetings all day, and as Holly reporters, as both of you have experienced, we would get asked about whatever Trump had tweeted in the last 30 minutes, and there was a time where we haven't seen that, and reporters would then print out the tweets and say, here's the tweet, respond to it, in real time.
I kind of love it.
So yeah, I mean, it went from something that I was a platform that I didn't personally use. I still don't really personally use Twitter very much myself.
Better for you.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It's changed a lot. I think I'm trying to remember. There was a really interesting poll, and I hate to even cite it because I'm going to get it wrong, but it was just sort of the like average of Republican to Democrat outlay on Twitter, and it was like something like just astronomical. Like if Twitter was a congressional district, like what would the PVI score be? And it was like just plus 30 or something Dems. Like it was so it's never been for Republicans. I think it's always been used a little bit differently and seen a little bit differently. But yeah, Trump flipped that on its head and said, hey, I'm going to go direct to to the voters and have this Twitter platform. And now it is kind of maybe we'll find out with the presidential how people use these platforms in this presidential cycle. That'll be interesting.
I mean, virality, we saw in John Fetterman's race, like virality does play and will play a campaign role because we're a campaign franchise here at the run-up, in his victory. And there's sort of a premium, I think, in at least Democratic consulting circles right now toward those vendors who worked for him, because they got him viral, and that sort of reached an audience. I think a little while ago, I was talking to a manager of a 2020 campaign, I shan't say who, and he was describing to me how the campaign messed up, and that they should have treated MSNBC as a place to go to reach out to a very specific constituency, not just liberals, but liberals with money in like New York, and to raise money that way. And that's the value of it, and sort of defining for the principal why they're doing what when seems to be a smart move. And you kind of can see that right now with Ron DeSantis, who is doing things. I mean, it's official government time. But it seems like he's doing things and choosing his moves to make himself known to conservative activists and the early state people who any candidate needs to really take off. Grace, you're furrowing your brow.
I just furrow my brow in general when you speak.
Okay.
Now, I have a question, but I will allow Annalyse to respond to that first.
Yeah, I mean, I think most Republicans recognize, I'll just say this about, kind of the going viral and the sort of the Fetterman strategy and the, going on TikTok and, all of that. I mean, there's certainly those individuals that break the mold, but I think, by and large in the campaign environment, like Republicans are not going to win the battle on Twitter. And so, they look to, sort of different places where they can get their message out. And I think, you mentioned DeSantis. I also think he has kind of a foothold in the sort of conservative leading tech community of, Silicon Valley, like the sort of Austin, Texas, sort of some of those pockets. So, that's just been my observations, and curious to see.
Interesting.
Yeah, sorry, Grace, go ahead.
I was just gonna follow up on what you're talking about with Twitter being different for Republicans than for Democrats. I think you're definitely right that there are different constituencies. But I'm just wondering if you think that's evolved at all in recent months/years, now that we've seen a couple of these conservative-ish social media sites pop up. And then also with Elon Musk taking over Twitter, and as you were just talking about with some of the more conservative-friendly folks in Silicon Valley, do you think that landscape is changing at all?
I think it is a little bit, but slowly. I don't think it's something that's. I think there's more outliers. I think there are some Republicans that do really well on Twitter, but the majority of them don't. And I think I think it's sort of the opposite for Democrats, that they typically do a better job, and those are their audiences. So it's also like, it's a resource allocation. I mean, when you're looking at a campaign and you're trying to figure out if you're going to spend a lot of time and resources. I mean, I think John Fetterman had something like 20 digital people. Did that make sense for a Dr. Oz campaign? I mean, he wanted to probably reach the people across the state, maybe where they were, maybe maybe it wasn't as critical in terms of looking at what kind of budget you have to be paying 20 digital staffers and to have a really aggressive like TikTok strategy. Like that probably just wasn't, the calculus that they made probably didn't include that, and it probably shouldn't have. I mean, I don't think that you have to kind of look at who you're trying to reach and how much budget you have and how you want to allocate those resources. So I think it's changing a little bit. Some Republicans are getting a little bit better, and of course there's, you know, conservative blogs and outlets and Twitter accounts that have a big, you know, conservative following. But those are the people that you know typically know are going to vote for you. And if you're going to try to get moderate voters and you're trying to get, you know, build kind of a coalition of you know, moderate people, and you're in a tough general election, like, you know, you kind of know where those people are going to go, right?
Yeah, for sure. Grace?
On this note, I think this is a good time to pivot to talking about that presidential campaign, because campaign season never ends, and you brought up DeSantis. So speaking of Ron DeSantis, I feel like there's sort of this narrative forming that the Republican primary is going to end up being a matchup between DeSantis and Trump, and that one of them will be the one to beat. And then you have all of these other smaller candidates throwing their hat in the race or gearing up to. But so far, the only announced candidate we have on the Republican side other than Trump is Nikki Haley. And DeSantis is clearly dipping his toe in the water, but he hasn't announced yet. I just wanted to get your thoughts on the conventional wisdom as I'm seeing it form about how this Republican primary is going to go down. Is DeSantis the guy to beat, with the typical caveats of it's super duper early and we don't know who's going to jump in and blah, 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 blah.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think Nikki Haley is not someone to like totally dismiss. I think I mean, she's a very, very credible and polished, and, you know, has a great resume and is a great person to represent. You know, I don't want to be dismissive of any of these people that, you know, are looking at getting into the race or, you know, having these conversations, because I think there are a lot of viable candidates out there. But with that said, I do think that DeSantis and Trump is where it's probably going to, you know, it's where, yeah, the conventional wisdom tells us it's going to play out. I think what is challenging and what a lot of Republicans are talking about, you know, privately to a varying degree, publicly, is that the more people get in this race as the quote alternative to Trump, the more inevitable Trump becomes. You know, because if you separate that vote, you know, it's not a huge lane. If you sort of think, I mean, you have people who are going to vote for Trump no matter what. I don't know if that's 20% of the Republican electorate or 30%, but you have a block of people that are always going to vote for Trump. So then the rest of the individuals that get into this presidential primary are vying for what's left over. And if, you know, 10 people are the alternative to Trump and they're each pulling, you know, from that pool, it just becomes increasingly harder to see a Republican primary nominee who's not Donald Trump.
It's interesting because I feel like there's within the alternative Trump lane, there's like the anti-Trump alternative to Trump and then the Trumpist alternative Trump. So an example of an anti-Trump alternative would be like a Mike Pence or even maybe a Chris Sununu. And then the Trumpist alternative would be like Ron DeSantis, who's very much positioning himself as the sort of heir to Trumpism. So I feel like even within that lane, it could become further divided as people try to position themselves in those various alternatives.
Where's your money, by the way, on if it's not Trump, the anti-Trump or the Trumpist winning the primary?
I think with all the usual caveats that it's too early to tell, I think you know, it's most likely going to be it feels like the momentum right now is for DeSantis. And it feels like that is what, most people in the party are pretty comfortable with. I think what's going to be interesting, this is a little bit different, but I think it will be interesting to see how, I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that Mike Pence and Pompeo and Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that all of these individuals who are running go directly after Trump. I mean, I think obviously so I'm interested to see how they continue to maneuver. So clearly now they're making some comments about age, about, testing, about, they're kind of doing some of these indirect targets. So I'm curious to see how forward leaning they are. I would recommend that they, if I'm advising one of them, to kind of rise above the fray and sort of just like not be worried about what Donald Trump is doing. That would be my advice. So I think it's not a foregone conclusion that they will all pile onto Trump. And I think I've actually been somewhat surprised by the amount of people like Sununu and some others who've kind of decided they want to take on DeSantis. And I was speaking to someone who worked for a governor as well, and I was just kind of trying to understand how they're thinking about this and the calculus, and it was described to me as sort of a hornet's nest that you can kind of kick, and you kind of know that you're going to get a lot. So I wonder how much right now, this early, people are going after DeSantis, just with the known understanding that it's going to, really like rock the boat right now, and they're going to get a lot of eyeballs on whatever it is that they're saying. So I thought that that's been kind of interesting to just kind of see how people are trying to contrast themselves with Trump, but more publicly DeSantis right now.
I mean, who could forget in 2016 the insane murder-suicide of Chris Christie and Marco Rubio on the debate stage?
I was on the Chris Christie beat at the time. I was up in New Hampshire for a month.
Yeah, and did you have fun?
Fun is a charged word. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
Good experience.
I do think there's a valid question, and there's been coverage, including by TNR alum Nate Cohn, about whether, like, we have not seen DeSantis on a national stage, and there is sort of an ancillary moment or sort of squinty view of him to Scott Walker, but Cohn in the end found that they were not the same at all. That's probably true.
Yeah, so I guess, so what you're getting at is that, some could say he's a little untested at this level, and, is that kind of what you're getting at going through, a debate?
But it's hard to say that about someone. I mean, I guess Walker's whole thing was he won 3 elections, blah, blah, blah. But it's hard to say that about DeSantis, just as someone who has, won in Florida, and Democratic consultants like to say that their party does it all wrong and should be treated as 3 states. And he was not the favored candidate, and he has managed to both seem like a Trump disciple and sort of spark his animosity without losing support. I mean, it does seem like DeSantis has some idea of his course.
Yeah, I think he does, and he's smart to not get in the fray right now. I think all of this can change really quickly, and I do think there is something to the question of that his team is probably grappling with, like, when's the moment to put him out and to test him. And I don't think that he has been under that national microscope in the way that he will be, and so that will certainly be a big moment. I think most people in the party are pretty confident when I speak to them about those concerns, because I've heard them from other people. But I mean, certainly it will be something that people watch with a lot of interest in the party and the press as well.
As someone who covers the Senate a lot, I think Tim Scott is a really interesting figure. And I feel like he's the kind of guy in a quote unquote normal year, like a pre-Trump presidential year, or a year in which Trump was not a factor. I feel like he could do really well, but in this environment where the news is just so dominated by Trump and DeSantis, I don't really know what path he has. And maybe I'm underestimating him, but to me, even if there are those candidates who might seem strong on paper in quote unquote normal times, like a Tim Scott or a Nikki Haley, that once you get on the field, it's just, especially in this day and age, too difficult to break out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Tim Scott's someone to dismiss. I think he in particular has a really powerful record on fundraising. And so I think we'll see, you know, that's not to say that other people who haven't had really big war chests on both sides of the aisle, you know, it doesn't always translate into doing really well. But I think he's not someone to dismiss, the same way I think that Nikki Haley's not someone to dismiss. I think you know, there are also, you know, some of these natural conclusions to these folks that are running. I mean, there's, I think a lot of conversations right now in the party are, you know, who would be a really great vice president choice. And, you know, so there's also those considerations going around. And, you know, who's to say, again, that's not, I do really think that they should not, neither of these individuals should be dismissed. I think there's some others that they're the strongest that stand out to me, but we'll have to see who all gets into the field. You know, anything can happen. We don't know what these debates are going to look like. We don't know if Trump's going to participate in debates. We don't know if DeSantis is going to participate in debates. And I think there's a lot that we don't know. You know, this could just be another kind of really strange presidential primary on the Republican side. So there's just a lot to see. But yeah, I agree with you. I think Tim Scott's you know, he's a very inspirational and he's a very optimistic leader. And I think that the party really needs someone like that. I think he has a lot of similarities to Cory Gardner in that respect.
Your former Senator Gardner is working with the prototype Scott campaign. Were they friends for a while, or what is that? They're both known as pretty good fundraisers within the party, right?
They are, yes. So yeah, they have worked together legislatively for a very long time on a number of things, you know, opportunity zones, manufacturing, lots of different issues during their time in the Senate. And then yes, he's co-chairing his super PAC. So obviously that is affiliated with the campaign, but there are obviously pretty stringent rules on communications and cooperation with the actual campaign itself. So usually would pick somebody to do that you know, you know, have a relationship with or you know, trust with. But I would say that, just back to my earlier point, I think something that united them is the way that they legislate and their optimism. I mean, Gardner was always smiling. I'm sure you both covered him, but that was kind of his MO.
Super cheerful.
Always happy and cheerful. Yes, it could be. Always in a good mood. I mean, that was real, you know, in public and in private. That's his character. When he was confronted with challenges, like, he was not a pessimist. He was always like trying to figure out how to get things done. And I think that is how Tim Scott approaches things. So that kind of drew them together. They both have done a lot of campaigning together. They campaigned for O'Day together in Colorado. So they have they did, yes. So they have a long storied history of working together.
Not exactly a favorite of Trump's. He
you
pays
mean O'Day?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
We've only got a few minutes left, and I think Grace and I have a burning
Oh yeah.
non-politics question. But do you have another one, Grace?
Another one before our fun question. I was, now of course I am losing my spot in our question document. I did want to ask a question that I think Daniel posed in our doc first, but we saw in 2016 there was a lot of shifting back and forth throughout the Republican primary in terms of who members of Congress supported. Like they would go for one candidate and then that candidate would drop out and then they'd go for another one. Sometimes they would do two before they would get to Trump. So it was just, it felt like people got invested very early on. Do you think that we're going to see the same level of investment in endorsements from members of Congress, or do you think we'll have people more keeping their powder dry and seeing how it all shakes out?
Yeah, I think we'll see right out of the gate a lot of people that have relationships, and we've already seen endorsements for Nikki Haley. I think, if a Tim Scott were to get in, I think he'd have, a lot of close relationships with senators that would, sort of get behind him on, right out of the gate. I think we'll get a mix. I think it will be a relationship driven at first, and then there will be a few surprises, as there always are, and then there will be those who will wait to see how the field sort of shapes up. I think it'll be a mix, but we'll definitely, undoubtedly there will be people right out of the gate that will be very close to some of these candidates, and they'll endorse them on day one.
Do you guys know who one of Rand Paul's endorsees or endorsers were when he ran for president?
No.
Who his first one? No.
Mitch McConnell.
Well, that makes sense because it's Kentucky.
Yeah, but the suspect thing was this was the deal, which was McConnell was running for re-election the cycle before and needed Rand's support to keep the Tea Party off his back. So, this was just the rumor I had heard, but like it makes sense. Yeah, Annalyse is like,
God, when did
like what?
When did he do that? Was that 2016?
2014 cycle was McConnell's reelect when he had a primary challenger, Matt Bevin, who would go on to be governor, and then defeated. Yeah. Okay, let's ask the question. Oh, let's ask the question. So on your biography, on 7-letter, it says like, ask me about my sci-fi book recommendations. Daniel and I are both big sci-fi nerds. Big old nerds.
So we are going to ask you about your sci-fi book recommendations.
I've been waiting for someone to ask me. So
you mean in general or today?
Both. I've been waiting to be asked. That's why I put it on there. No, well, I am also a big science fiction and fantasy reader, and that is what I enjoy doing with my spare time. So I will tell you the book that I just finished. I just finished Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo.
I haven't read that one yet.
I highly. Oh yeah, so it's I know it's like been a long time since the 9th House came out, so you may need to like refresh your memory, but it was a great sequel. I just finished that one. And I'm a Brandon Sanderson fan, Tolkien fan, all of the goodies.
I've heard those are good. Like if you want a series that will end, because it's Brandon Sanderson, right? Is this the guy, the Stormlight?
Brandon, yeah, Brandon. Stormlight, Mistborn, all of that good stuff. Yeah.
And he finished his series.
Yeah, he does finish series. I haven't read Stormlight. I have read Mistborn. It was very good.
Mistborn was excellent. Two that I always recommend by two female authors, Naomi Novik, Uprooted, Baron the Nightingale by Catherine Arden was wonderful. And also City of Brass.
Yes, I have that. Okay, yeah. I'm going to give that another shot because the series I'm the book series I'm on right now is dense. And I'm having a lot of trouble getting through the first few pages, but City of Brass is awesome.
Is it sci-fi fantasy that you're reading, Daniel?
Yes, it is. And I'm gonna, Kim is gonna like hate me for this, but I'm gonna pull it up because I always forget the name. So talk amongst yourselves while I do that.
So you like sci-fi and fantasy both, right, Annalise?
I do.
Have you ever read Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie?
I have not.
Right. It's a sci-fi trilogy. It is very, very good. Highly recommend. And then another sci-fi series that, or not really series, it's a duology that I really liked is The Sparrow by Maria, now I'm not going to remember her name, Maria Doria Russell. And that's really interesting because it's a sci-fi story, but also deals a lot with faith. And I'm a big fan of sci-fi stories and fantasy stories that also deal with religion. So if that interests you at all, recommend that as well.
I just took a little note, so I'll check both of those out. I'm not familiar with either. I will say that I'm not a big like apocalyptic person. Sort of,
So
that's
you
not
probably
my.
are not watching The Last of Us.
I'm absolutely not watching that. No, that is not for me. I did read Hunger Games when I was younger, but generally that is not my genre.
Stephen Erickson, Gardens of the Moon is what I'm reading right now, and I can't get through any word. So I guess, I mean, I don't know if you two are gonna, the 3-question problem.
The 3-body problem. I have so many problems with the 3-body problem.
Okay,
and
not worth it.
But I feel like we've tortured our viewers. Right. So
we could go on forever. We could do another podcast.
Yeah, we could do
another live just on this. We'll get tens of viewers.
We can do that later. Yes, I'd love to take part in that one as well.
All right, everybody, thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you so much, Annalyse Keller, for spending this hour with us and chatting with us. It was just an absolute treat to talk to you about politics and sci-fi. So thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everybody. See you next time on the Run Up Live.